the not energy efficient stock of properties is going to go down in values because people who buy it, they're going to have to invest, they're going to have to renovate it to bring it to code to be able to rent it.
Have you been thinking about buying your first rental property for some time, or do you already own a bunch of properties? Well, fellow investors, you found the right location to listen and learn from others' successes. Welcome to The Very Real Estate Effect with your host, Axel Mont-Saint-Jean.
Hello, and welcome back to the Very Real Estate Effect podcast, a show dedicated to real estate investing right here in Quebec, North America, and basically anywhere you want, as long as the podcast brings you value. So, as some of you may know, I've been in Europe for a part of the summer, and I had a few things I wanted to share with you because one of my missions is to bring you insights and trends on what's happening in other places in the world, so you can start applying it, and it can make you think about your portfolio and where you want to go with it. So I'm going to jump into an energy efficiency item that's been happening in Europe, most specifically in France. And in my mind, it's important to share that you're aware of it because eventually it's going to be coming here too. And I want you to know about it as early as possible. So about 20 years ago in France, when there was a law that was passed saying that each building, but when you sell, you have to do what's called a DEP, a diagnostic of energy performance, and it's part of the diagnostic of the building. So what they call diagnostic, I know it sounds medical, but it's got nothing to do with this. Here we're used to doing an inspection, right? You do a building inspection, you get an inspector to come, he looks at absolutely everything. Over there, it's called a diagnostic. And since about 20 years, there's now an energy efficiency component that's quite interesting. And its purpose is really to inform, so it's at the charge of the owner to provide to a possible buyer or possible tenant, and I repeat, tenant, in order to be able to estimate the energy consumption and the impact of the building in terms of gas emissions. And this is for, again, a potential buyer or seller to be informed on how green the building is, on what could be done to improve it, and again, to estimate energy charges. And this has been put in place because energy efficiency in Europe is very expensive, is very important. I'll correct that. Let's correct that at editing. Energy efficiency in Europe is very important because energy is more expensive. So it's important to build properly and to make sure that over time, the real estate stock, so like the total amount of buildings and dwellings out there, improves in energy efficiency over time. So how does it work? So basically there is two ratings, okay? And I'll try to attach a picture of a rating of a listing, because every listing, you look at listings online, you look at listings at a broker, at the window when you walk on the sidewalk, and there's this scale system. It's obviously it's the rainbow. It's like different shades of green, different shades of yellow, different shades of orange, and then red. And then right next to it, there's another one that's like blue to gray to blue, and that is for gas emissions. So basically, the way it works is that it's a point system, and it looks at, so you call in a diagnosticer. I'm not sure what's the term in English. It's basically like a energy performance building inspector, and they come and they look at everything. So the quality of the windows, the quality of the insulation at the foundation level, in the walls, and in the ceiling. They look at the HVAC system. So if you have an air conditioning, what kind of heating system do you have? Very important. Over there's less houses with AC, but the heating system is very important, whether it's fuel, and obviously that's going to add to gas emissions, whether it's electric, whether it's wood, basically like fire-based or not. And then how is it made? So obviously you want to have the best possible system. You want to have the best windows and the most energy efficient. And the thing is that, so they do a whole mapping of the building. They look at each component, and there's a point system. And then obviously the more points you get, the worse it is. So new buildings now, they basically have to be in the green, and they are for the most part, because there's a huge push, and there's also tax credits for this. So it's important For owners and for buyers and for investors like us, why? Because in about 2027 to 2028, the buildings and the properties and the apartments, the units, the doors, whatever way you want to call them, that are rated on an F or below, so it's A to G, G like George, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So the lowest two, you're not going to be able to rent them anymore, because this is to push owners to do renovations and work to improve energy efficiency, to reduce the cost of utilities for tenants, and because it's better for the environment. Because there's the term that it's an energy strainer, right? You heat, like we have a lot of those in Quebec, where and I keep thinking of like the old plateau buildings, and I'm not just picking on the plateau. There's so many buildings like this that where the windows have never been changed, and you remove the moldings and you can basically see between the window frame and the wall outside, right? You can see there's no insulation, there's nothing. So it's to improve on the building quality. And don't forget, in Europe, when they build for 100 years. I hate to say, they build much stronger. They build a lot more solid than we do here. So there's a lot more of an incentive to, yeah, maybe pay more at construction, but have a more energy efficient building. Now, for investors, this is super important because given that at a certain point in time, you're not going to be able to rent anymore, there it creates opportunities, because the I was going to say the old stock, the not energy efficient stock of properties is going to go down in values, because people who buy it, they're going to have to invest, they're going to have to renovate it to bring it to code to be able to rent it. So that's going to create opportunities because, I'll just pick an example. The older couple who bought an apartment 30 years ago and been renting it out, and now it's not energy efficient anymore, is going to be on the market selling most likely at a slight discount, because it's not going to be able to ensure revenue in the future. So the energy efficiency part is, as I said, certain criteria, and I'm not going to go dive into all the point system now because it doesn't really make sense. But what you need to remember is how it's built. So the materials, the insulation, and at the different levels, the window type, the heating of the air, the heating of the building, the water heating system. If there is an energy, if there's a heat pump or an AC. And then there is one more. What is it? I mentioned the windows, the energy efficiency. Yeah. And then this gets also translated into gas emissions, because obviously if you heat with oil, then you produce a lot more, you get a lower ranking, and so on and so forth. And so remember here how people just are specialized in optimization on multifamily, where they buy buildings that have a furnace, they get rid of the gas furnace, they install electrical, they give that cost to the tenants so they can control their own heat, and that creates an opportunity. It's going to be the same thing in Europe. Now, why do I think it's so important for you? Because what happens in Europe usually comes here 5 to 10 years later. So, is it possible to think that in a few years, on every listing to rent or to buy and sell, there will be an energy performance metric? I think it will. It's bound to happen. It's just a question of time. And that creates opportunity. And I have friends, they specialize in doing optimizations in Alberta, because in a way in Alberta they're not advanced as we are here in Quebec. And so if you have the Quebec knowledge and you go to Alberta, you're like a rock star. Well, maybe it's going to be the same thing all over Canada, thinking from a European perspective and hat. So it's important for you to know and to keep this in mind, because as you choose properties to buy, you have to put a lot of incentive on what kind of building you buy according to its energy efficiency, according to how green it is, according to how much gas emissions it produces, because one day it will come back and shoot you in the foot. Now, in your portfolio, you might have some properties that were built in the 50s or in the 30s that are somewhat insulated. You've changed the windows, but now would be time to change the whole insulation in the walls. Now you may not want to do this, and that will be one of the first properties that you'll want to dispose of and sell. So again, what happens in Europe ends up coming back here. And where I felt like it was important to show to share this with you is that over there now it's the law. It's mandatory. Okay, so imagine you pick up a listing from whichever broker and it automatically comes with an energy efficiency report of the building and a ranking, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And again, the F and the G, they are not going to be able to be rented. Now, why is that? Because the government wants to improve the energy efficiency, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. And they also want to make sure that tenants aren't stuck holding the bag of high costs, because a property that's not well insulated, that is badly heated, you pay a lot more for less quality. And in a way, it doesn't serve anyone because, as we say here, if your windows aren't shut and you have the heat on, you're just heating Quebec. And no one wants to just heat the atmosphere. That's exactly what we're trying to not do. So get informed, think of energy efficiency, and think of all the opportunities it's going to create as long as you're willing to undergo the work, because that's the big factor. Why are people saying, oh, well, this building, yeah, you just need to optimize it, it's got great potential? Well, why aren't you doing it? Well, just because it's too much work and it's very costly. Okay, so then if I have to do this work, then that comes at a discount. Now, you might be thinking, oh, here we go again. That's another government intervention into our lives and telling us what to do. Like, how does it all work? So again, just like we do here, building inspection, over there, you get an inspector to come. He does all the diagnostics. And when it comes to energy efficiency, once the report is done, he's got to give it to um, an organization that quickly reviews it to make sure that the person who did the diagnostic is fully certified, fully licensed. And then they emit a 13-digit number, and that number validates. And then it goes into a database. So then there's a record. So then I don't know if anyone has access to it, but without that 13-digit number, that report is invalid. So this is how it ensures validity and also to be able to track it over time, because the diagnostics are valid for 10 years unless you do some work. Now there's been some changes in the law, so if it was done before 2018, you got to redo it, and so on and so forth. And I don't want to bore you with all those details, but the main takeaway that you need to get is that you better get ready. Energy efficiency is coming to all of us. Here in Canada, we're blessed with so much resources and very cheap electricity. So for us, it's just normal to heat with electricity, to have baseboards, even though now they're less and less suggested. Heat pumps are more expensive, but they're really some of the best. And you need to keep it in mind, because that's going to be a major factor in the near future. Thank you for following. If you have any ideas or topics you'd like to hear about, please let me know. I try to respond to everything I get, and share this episode with a friend who could benefit from this conversation. And I'd like to know what you think about this. Has this been a factor for you? Is the energy efficiency a decisive variable in the purchases you make? And if yes, how so? Please let me know. Thank you very much, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.